And with that, let me turn over now to our guest, Abdelmoula, who is the Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator for Somalia, who's here to talk to you about the launch of the Somali Humanitarian Response Plan. Mr. Abdelmoula, please, over to you. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ha. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Greetings from Mogadishu, Somalia. Today, together with the federal government of Somalia and our humanitarian partners, the UN released the 2023 Humanitarian Response Plan, HRP, for Somalia, which seeks 2.6 billion US dollars to assist about 7.6 million vulnerable people in 2023. This appeal is being launched at a very difficult time for Somalia. The country is on the brink of famine due to prolonged drought, conflict, high food and water prices, and massive displacement. While Somalia has been experiencing a protracted humanitarian crisis for more than 3 decades, the drought that is currently ravaging the country is truly unprecedented. The number of people affected by drought in January 2022 had more than doubled by the end of the year, and the number of people displaced by the drought increased more than fivefold over this past year. In addition to drought, conflict and insecurity continue to drive displacement and generate humanitarian needs. Overall, 3.8 million people are internally displaced, with the majority affected by conflict and climate shocks. This is one of the highest IDP case loads in the world. High levels of displacement further exacerbate already limited access to basic services. An estimated 8 million people lack access to safe water as well as appropriate sanitation and hygiene services at a time when disease outbreaks are increasing compared to recent years. Between July 2022 and June of this year, approximately 1.8 million children under 5 will likely face acute malnutrition, including more than 513,000 who are likely to be severely, acutely malnourished. The high rates of acute malnutrition have increased the risk of diseases and deaths from preventable causes such as cholera, measles, and acute watery diarrhea, while fewer than a third of the people in areas affected by drought are estimated to have access to essential health care. Close to 6.4 million people are likely facing high levels of acute food insecurity through March of this year. This number is expected to increase to 8.3 million people between April and June amid an anticipated reduction in funding for humanitarian assistance. This includes 727,000 people who are expected to experience catastrophic hunger, what we call IPC Phase 5. Humanitarian organizations, local communities, and government authorities have scaled up responses to provide life-saving assistance. With generous donor contributions, the humanitarian organizations reached 7.3 million people in 2022. The efforts of local communities and the scale-up of humanitarian assistance prevented famine threshold from being surpassed in 2022, as had been projected in Bay region between October and December. But the distinction between a declared famine and what millions of Somalis are already experiencing is truly meaningless. They are already going hungry, children are starving, and higher than normal deaths will continue to occur unless assistance is sustained and improved. The underlying crisis has not improved, and even more appalling outcomes are only temporarily averted. 5 consecutive poor rainy seasons, the longest and most severe drought in the recent history, is now devastating Somalia, and a 6th below average rainy season is currently projected. Famine is a strong possibility from April to June this year, and of course beyond, if humanitarian assistance is not sustained and if the April to June rains underperform as currently forecasted. If fully funded, the 2023 Humanitarian Response Plan will meet the needs of about 7.6 million people out of more than 8.25 million people who need urgent humanitarian assistance and protection. This number is nearly half the estimated population of Somalia, and almost 80% of those in need are women and children. The 2022 Humanitarian Response Plan for Somalia was 67% funded. With higher and more severe needs in 2023 and the continued risk of famine, we can and must do better. While the global outlook this year is challenging, I urge donors to stand with the people of Somalia at this extremely challenging time. I also appeal for more resources to be channeled to national actors who are critical frontline responders. That said, we must recognize that the people affected by successive droughts in Somalia are the human face of the global climate emergency. Therefore, while humanitarians focus on life-saving activities to avert famine, there is a critical need to invest in livelihoods, resilience, infrastructure development, climate adaptation, and durable solutions for the internally displaced in order to break the cycle of recurrent humanitarian crisis and perpetual aid dependency. The 2.6 billion we are aiming to mobilize for humanitarian response must be accompanied by financing for resilience, development, and climate adaptation. After the 2011 famine, the international community said, quote, unquote, never again. If we truly want to honor that promise, there is no time to lose. Every delay in assistance is a matter of life or death for families in need. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abdelmoula. I'll now turn the floor over to reporters to ask questions. First question goes to Ibtisam.
Thank you. On behalf of the United Nations Correspondent Association, thank you for the briefing. My name is Ibtisam Azim from Al Arabi Al Jadid newspaper. I have just a first quick follow-up on the $2.6 billion you mentioned. What would they cover? Like, is it only the basic needs like food and shelter, etc.? If you could a little bit elaborate on that. And then on, you talked about, and I wasn't sure about the number because the line was cutting. Am I right that you said about 700,000 people are in phase 5? And how many people do we have in phase 3, which is one step away from famine? Could you elaborate on that? Thank you.
Thank you, Ibtisam. With regard to your first question, we have an integrated approach to the scaling up the response. But the four priority areas are food security, nutrition, health, and wash. That's water and sanitation. But of course, there are other equally important sectors, such as protection, which is central to our response, and other related matters. But those are the key sectors that we are focusing on at the moment. With regard to the number of the people who are already or are projected to be in phase 5, IPC phase 5 between April and June, that number is 727,000.
So,
The
sorry,
total,
just to clarify, so that's what you project if you don't get aid. This is the number of people who will be in phase 5 in April, starting from April.
those are the people who are going to be in phase 5. With regard to the total number of the people who are in need of food assistance, and that includes IPC 4 and 5 only. Okay, we are not including IPC 3 at this stage. That number is 7.6 million.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Murad Hashim from Al Jazeera Arabic. What are the regions and areas that most impacted by famine? And could you elaborate more on the ability to operate in these areas?
Okay, the epicenter of the food crisis in Somalia at the moment is the Bay region and the IDP communities around the Banadr region, and that's the capital, Mogadishu. Now, in the Bay region, there are two particular areas that are the highest affected, and those are the IDP areas around Baidawa city and the pastoral communities around Baidawa. Most of these areas are accessible to the humanitarian responders, both here around Mogadishu and in the Bay region.
Hi, thank you so much. Just a series of very short follow-ups. You mentioned that this drought, which is the fifth, if I'm not mistaken, is unprecedented. Can you just elaborate a little bit? What is it that's different about it? The previous ones were pretty dramatic. What's different about this one? What's unprecedented about this one?
Thank you very much for that question, because it allows me to truly draw the contrast. The 2011-2012 famine that killed 260,000 people was the result of 3 consecutive failed rainy seasons. Now we have already surpassed 5 failed rainy seasons. And that should tell you where are we at the moment. In addition to that, the period from January to March is known locally as the dry season, the Gilal dry season. And that is supposed to be followed by a rainy season from April to June. That is the 6th and is already projected by every forecaster that is going to be below average as well. So this is truly unprecedented in the country's history. Don't listen to those who tell you that this is the worst drought in 40 years. This is the worst drought in Somalia's recorded history, period.
Thank you. And another one, also you broke up a little when you said, when you were mentioning the percentage of the 2022 appeal that was funded. You said 67%, right?
It is 67%.
67.
And
yeah.
67%. And I hasten to say that 80% of that funding came from a single donor country, and that's the United States.
Yes.
And
yes.
the US made it clear again and again that that was a one-off.
Yes, and the U.S. Permanent Representative was in Somalia last week. Did you feel after the Anga, because Somalia was a huge headline here in New York during the General Assembly, we had the drought response presidential envoy here trying to rally all the countries to pay attention to what's happening in Somalia. Do you feel anything changed in the international response and the dynamic and the awareness regarding what's happening in Somalia after those efforts recently? Or do you still feel that Somalis are left to fend for themselves somehow?
Well, despite the fact that Somalia has gradually came back to the world's attention, that hasn't translated itself into added funding for the humanitarian response yet.
And one last one. You mentioned a very important issue as well, that Somalis don't want to be knocking on doors asking for money for much longer, and they want investment as well in livelihoods and resilience and infrastructure and all of that. And how much do you think the international community is seeing eye to eye on that level as well, in that particular issue?
Well, I have consistently been saying that what we see in Somalia is equally a development crisis. It's not a humanitarian crisis, and that there are no humanitarian solutions for this protracted crisis. There are only developmental interventions that can wean the country and its people from this endless dependency on humanitarian handouts. And while most of the donors agree, we still haven't seen that level of development assistance that would enable the country to adapt with the accelerating and intensifying climate change and to enable the communities to rely on themselves through income and employment generation interventions. I haven't seen that happen yet.
Sorry, one last one, sir. I apologize. Can you tell us one word about what's happening to people who are under Al-Shabaab's controlled areas? Is anyone being able to reach them? Are they in touch with somebody? Can you give us a picture? What's going on in those areas that are difficult to reach?
Well, those are the areas that we refer to as the hard-to-reach areas. Unfortunately, we have very, very limited access to areas under Al-Shabaab control. We try to use proxies, at times community leaders, some community-based NGOs, and so on. But that is very sporadic and very inconsistent. However, due to the most recent offensive by the government against Al-Shabaab that led to the government regaining control of areas that have been under Al-Shabaab control, some for extended periods of time, we came close to getting a glimpse of how the situation looks like in areas that are still under Al-Shabaab control. And compared to the communities that we have been dealing with and the caseload of the humanitarian interventions, these people are in a much worse shape than those that we have already identified to be at the brink of famine in the Bay region. So that gave us an idea about how the situation looks like in Al-Shabaab controlled territory. There are estimated around 700,000 people who remain under Al-Shabaab control.
We'll now turn to the screens. Maggie?
Hi, thanks for doing the briefing. My question is, how is the Black Sea Grain Initiative helping you? How much have you received in terms of grain, and is it enough?
Well, the only benefit we got from the Black Sea Initiative is that the government of Ukraine donated 25,000 metric tons of wheat for Somalia. And that is being shipped to the seaport of Berbera. And from there, some of it will be shipped again to different destinations in Somalia, while some would be distributed locally, and a third parcel will be transported by road to the middle parts of the country.
Ibtisam, you had one?
Hi, this is Ibtisam again, sorry. Just a last question from me regarding something you mentioned. You said that the US was the largest donor last year, and which meant that many rich countries, whether Western countries or Arab or Muslim countries, didn't donate. And my question here is, do you believe, or what's your appeal to other countries for this year? And are you feeling that they will be donating more, or are you afraid that other crises around the world, whether Ukraine or now the earthquake, will affect, unfortunately, negatively on donation to Somalia? What's your message there?
Well, Ibtisam, we have been sleepwalking into this crisis for a very, very long time. We started ringing the alarms and the alarm bells as far back as the summer of 2021. I did a tour to the Gulf countries. I visited 4 of them: Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, and Kuwait. I visited 5 European capitals, and those were Bern, Brussels, Berlin, Rome, and London. I made several trips to Washington, D.C. And since then, I repeated this a couple of times. We did a number of member states briefings in Geneva, together with high government officials, including the last one in April last year with the Prime Minister. And most recently, in December 2022, in partnership with the League of Arab States, we organized an event at the Arab League headquarters in Cairo, to which all the Arab League member states were invited, together with the League of Arab States organizations, affiliate organizations. And the special envoy has also done a tour to many capitals. But despite all of these efforts that go back for almost 2 years now, still the level of funding received this past year was only 67% of what was needed, and 80% of that came from a single source. The entire EU contributed 10%, and the rest of the world combined contributed 10%. And that's the reality.
Thank you. I'd like now again to thank our guest, Abdelmoula, the Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator for Somalia. Thanks very much for this briefing, and have a great evening. And
thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. And now I'll turn the floor over to the spokesperson for the President of the General Assembly, Paulina Kubiak.